Hi, welcome back for another week of Biblical Greek. We are now at lesson 9, and I'm going to take a moment, actually, probably a little bit longer than I have been doing, to go through this because there's a bit more in this chapter to absorb. Okay, the first is passive voice. Okay, passive voice. That should be pretty straightforward to you. It simply means expressing the action more indirectly. The deed is done, mistakes were made, I was destroyed, I was defeated, something like that. In other words, the whole idea of the action being sort of done to the main actor and the subject rather than him doing it. Okay, it's just another way of expressing action in a sentence. Okay, it works basically the same in Greek as it does in English. There's nothing really particularly unique about it. Okay, now middle voice, however, is entirely unique to Greek, as far as I know. There might be other languages that have it, but I haven't seen any. Okay, it tends to connote the idea of an action that refers back to the speaker in some sort of a subtle way. Okay, so for instance, I list a few examples here. The first one I give is praso erga kala. Okay, I do good deeds. And also we have prasama erga kala, I do good deeds. Okay, so what's the difference between the two of these? Well, in fact, in the way we would translate it, probably none. Okay, in both cases, you have the sense of the subject doing the action. Okay, in this case it's I. Okay, unexpressed. Okay, buried in the verb here. In other words, how do you know that this is particularly passive or middle voice and not passive in this sense here? Well, you know primarily because it doesn't really make any sense to translate it any other way. Okay, and you're basically going to see this very commonly, where you see an action that's expressed using this form here, which grammatically could either be passive or middle, but you pretty much have to take it as a middle. Now, what's the difference in sense here? Okay, here you just have a straight active voice. Here you have a middle voice. The second one carries a nuance. I'm acting kind of for myself, by myself, for my own purposes, for my own agenda. That's why I do good deeds. It doesn't have a negative connotation at all. It just sort of, in some sort of a subtle way, refers back to the actor of the sentence. Okay, but notice it has nothing to do with the action being reflexive. Okay, in a strict sense of the term. Okay, and we'll discuss that here a little bit below. All right, now I go ahead and comment on this. I'm basically saying here a lot of the same things. Okay, passive or middle voice can't really be translated exactly into English. Okay, it's sort of a sense that only comes in the Greek. Now, some of you may have had Spanish, and you might be thinking automatically, well, what's the similarity between this and reflexive verbs? Well, there's a little bit of similarity. I'll go back on what I said. When you use the verb to wash, lavar, say, or to get dressed, or to brush my teeth, to clean myself, limpiar, say, something like that. You have that kind of reflexive sort of a nuance, okay, where you're sort of acting on yourself. Okay, and sure enough, Greek would generally use a middle voice to convey that as well. Okay, but the problem with using that as an analogy is that middle voice has a much broader use in Greek than reflexive verbs do in Spanish. Okay, so that's probably not a great example. But let's take a look at a couple more of these. Here I give you another example of this. Middle voice, luetai ton anthropon here. Okay, luetai ton anthropon. Okay, so we're going to take this again as middle voice, even though grammatically luetai could either mean, if I just had luetai there without a context, it could mean what? It could mean he is being freed, okay, in a passive sense, or it could mean middle sense, he is freeing, okay, but in some sort of a subtle way of referring back to himself. Okay, but here's an example here. He frees the man. Okay, he frees the man. What's the difference between saying luetai ton anthropon and simply lue ton anthropon? If I wanted to speak this as an Forget the lack of accents here. Okay. In other words, what's the difference between these two sentences here? 1 and 2. Okay. Well, again, the same type of deal here. The first one here has this sort of self-referential nuance. It's in the middle voice. This is a straight active voice, so it really doesn't have that. But again, there's no real way you can capture that in English because English doesn't really have a middle voice. Okay, so you would translate it the same way in each case, but in the first example here, you would kind of bear in the back of your mind that maybe there's some kind of a sense in which the speaker or the actor here, the subject of the sentence, which isn't expressed, is acting on his own behalf or for his own purposes. Okay, so that's the basic idea of middle voice. Okay. They're very common, actually, and in fact, in many cases, middle voice will be used where there's really no real discernible sense of the action falling back to the speaker, and that's usually going to be in the case of deponent verbs, which are very common, but there's certain verbs that only appear in the middle voice. Okay, most verbs of motion, for instance, are like that. Erchomai, which we will soon meet if we haven't already. Apokrinomai, the verb for answer, very commonly used as well. This again doesn't necessarily have a self-referential nuance, but we'll see. Just it's one of those things in Greek we only see that verb in the middle voice. Okay, so it's not every time you see a verb in the middle that you want to go scouring the, racking the sense of the sentence for some kind of a self-referential nuance. But when you have an expression like this one here, luetai ton anthropon, that could have been expressed as a straight active sense, as we saw lue, then there's probably some reason for it. You want to pay attention to it. Okay, so keep in mind for that. Now, just as we had to learn the primary active verb endings, oase, omonete, usin, okay, those are the basic endings that we slap on any verb to make it go through its paces in the present active indicative. So also we're going to have the same sort of a phenomenon for middle voice and passive voice, which in the present actually are, of course, ambiguous. It can go either way. Maisai tai, methasai untai, right here. Okay, so it's good maybe to remember that. Now, in the second person singular, okay, you're going to get a collapsing. Okay, so in other words, where it would be lue sai, the sigmas for reasons that I don't totally understand have had a tendency to fall out, and so you get this awkward cluster of vowels, and they basically collapse into lue, which is what we have in our second person singular there. Okay, now let's go on here and take a look at how this works with some other verbs. Okay, hagiadzo, the verb to sanctify. Hagiadzomai, hagiadze, hagiadzetai, hagiadzamatha, hagiadzaste, hagiadzontai. Okay, the same basic pattern here, and again you get the contraction in the second person singular there, where it would be hagiadzesai. It collapses because the sigma falls out. Okay, you get that crassus, as it's called. Okay, and again this could either be middle or passive. Okay, you don't know until you have a context, and so when you're parsing these verbs, and I'm asking you to parse them in the homeworks, you've got to decide whether it's middle or passive. You cannot parse a verb as middle/passive, even though it could be either one. It generally speaking in a sentence is going to be one or the other. Okay, there are very few sentences which are truly ambiguous, although you will run across them from time to time. Okay, and he might even throw a couple at you to keep you on your toes. You will see some in the Bible that can be taken in more than one way, but generally speaking, you've got to make a decision. You cannot parse a verb as middle passive. Okay, it's got to be middle or passive. Okay, let's see here. What else? Yes, some verbs never appear in the passive voice. Amy will be an example of that. Generally speaking, a dead giveaway for when a verb is passive and not middle will be when there's an agency clause here. Hupo tu huperetu, by the servant, or by some other actor. In other words, if an action's being done by someone, you know right away that the verb pretty much has to be taken in a passive sense and not a middle one. Okay, the hupo clause kind of gives it away. Okay, sometimes you'll see it expresses a dative as well, all right, rather than with a hupo clause. Okay, now these deponent verbs, again, literally speaking, a deponent verb, if you've had Latin before, you've already seen them. They're verbs that literally lay aside their active forms. They just don't appear, they don't have active forms where we normally would expect them to. Okay, we still translate them as active verbs, though. Okay, so we'll see many of the most common verbs, and by the end of the course, you'll be entirely used to this, that always come up in a middle/passive form. Okay, and in which case you always translate them, in a middle way. Okay, or really basically as though they were active, because there's no real way to capture the middle in English very well. Okay, so. All right, let's take a look also while we're here at this business of compound verbs. Okay, compound verbs are a tremendously common phenomenon in Greek. Okay, what do I mean by a compound verb? A compound verb is simply a verb with a preposition slapped on it. Okay, here's an example of one, poreuomai, okay, which we've already seen, which means to go. Okay, in this case, poreuomai ek tes ek, that should be ek. I don't know why I have x here. Fix that. Ek tes ekklesias. Okay, so what does this mean here? I go out of the church. Okay, first of all, just incidentally notice what form is that? That's in middle voice. Okay, but keep in mind that verb always appears in middle voice. You'll never see an active for that. Okay, so there's no real sense in scouring it for some kind of a self-referential nuance. Okay, it just is there kind of grammatically. All right. But notice here that the ek is on the outside here. It basically just tells I'm leaving out of the church. But you frequently could see the ek slap right on the verb here. Okay, to ek poreuomai just means to go out of something. Okay, you might see, for instance, something like this: kata poreuomai. Okay, to go down. Okay, or apo poreuomai, to go away. Okay, there's all different combinations of I'm just kind of making up things as I go along here, but there's all different kind of combinations of what you could see there. All right, so very commonly you're going to see prepositions that are basically attached to verbs. All right, this is something you really want to get used to. Okay, learning your prepositions well and learning, first of all what they are, and so very quickly you can spot them being attached to verbs like that. It can help you build your word power actually very quickly, and that's one of the things Trenchard is good for. He will give you root words and then give you all the different ways in which they appear in compound. Okay, so very frequently if you can handle poreuomai, you can handle many other ways in which poreuomai might appear in compound. All right, so what does this mean here? The two sentences mean exactly the same thing. Okay, this is probably the second one is more a classical way of constructing this. In Biblical Greek, frequently you'll see both the preposition here and another one, and that should be ek here. I don't know what I'm thinking there. Ek tes ekklesia. And you also see one again here. It's a little bit redundant, and that's primarily because many of the writers are schooled in Hebrew. Okay, where in Hebrew very frequently you'll see an abundance of prepositions. Hebrew loves prepositions. Okay, Classical Greek tends not to like them as much. That's one of the big differences in Biblical Greek and Classical Greek. That the high use of prepositions in Biblical Greek. Okay, but okay, so keep in mind. These attached prepositions for compound verbs do sometimes change the meaning. Sometimes they don't change it all that much. Sometimes they change it in very predictable ways. Sometimes they don't. Okay, now, since we've been doing a lot with principal parts, it's worth taking a moment to explain how making a verb compound affects putting the verb through its paces and its principal parts. Okay, and the answer is it's very easy to handle it once you know what you're doing. Okay. You have to remember back to the chapter we had earlier on this business of elision and compounding. Okay, for prepositions. Okay, so you have, for instance, the root word stello. Okay, which means to sort of move away, shrink back. Okay, hupostello though is a little bit more common. That's used a few times in the Bible. That's what Peter did was accused of doing by Paul in Galatians when the Gentiles were there. So in other words, you can see it in a number of ways. Okay, but notice here we've got our basic way of putting the root word through the paces right here. Okay, stello, stello, stelloo, estella, estalka, estalmai, estallane. Okay, that's about what it is. But notice here what happens when I slap the apo prefix on, and then you get the very, very common word for send, and this is actually where we get our word apostle from. Okay, apostello, apostelloo, so no change there, but notice what happens in the third principal part. We got apostella, apostella. How did we get apostella? Just by this. Okay, we had this originally. Okay, so we augmented here, and when we went to slap the preposition on, we didn't change the preposition at all, except we hacked off its last vowel and just basically slapped it on there. Okay, so in other words, notice we don't augment the preposition itself. Okay, we never augment the compound. We always augment the underlying verb. Okay, with few exceptions to that rule, but that's basically the rule there. Same thing happened here. Okay, we had estalka, okay, which is what we had here, but we went and slapped an apo onto that, so we basically allied the apo and then just combine them together like that. So it's apestalka, apestalka. Okay, now if it were rough breathing, okay, which it's not, but if it were, this pi would soften to a phi. Okay, and we're going to see examples of that as well. But just keep in mind here that all we're doing is eliding the preposition and slapping it on, and not changing this at all. Okay, so in other words, the preposition is always basically the same, except it might be elided if it's slapped onto a word in compound that begins with a vowel. Okay, same thing happened here. We had apo slapped onto estalmai. Okay, we elided, and then we're back to where we started. Okay, same thing here. Okay, so you get the idea. You never change the prefix, the prepositional prefix. You leave it alone, except that you elide it. In other words, you never try to augment the alpha here. Okay, you leave that alone. You never try to reduplicate the prefix here. Okay, if there's reduplication to do, which there isn't in this particular case because we have a verb that begins with an S, but we'll see ones where you do reduplicate, because most of the time you do. You leave the preposition alone and do your reduplication, add the preposition on. Okay. Alright, so for instance, hupostello, this is the word for withdrawal. Same thing happens. See how you get hupo plus estella like this. Badum, badum. Okay, this was hupo, plus estalka to make hupestalka. Okay, hupo plus estalmai equals hupestalmai. Okay, nice, smooth, flowing together. Okay, now, angelo is actually not that common by itself, okay, which I think I hinted it was in the last chapter, but it's tremendously common in compound. Okay, apongelo is one of the most common words in the verbs in the Bible. Okay, it means to announce or to proclaim. Okay, don't ask me what the difference between apongelo and angelo is. I'm not really sure, but you just happen to find the apongelo much more commonly. Okay, so again, this started out as what? Apo plus angelo. Okay, hack off the final omicron to get apongelo. Okay, this is apo plus angelo, and this extra lambda here shouldn't be there, but it's apongelo, apongelo. Okay. Apengala. Okay, this is just apo plus angela to make apengala. Okay, or apengelka, apengelmai, apengelain, or apengelthane. Okay, so again, you handle this the same way. You do your augmentation or reduplication. In this case, it's all augmentation here. You elide the preposition, and then leave it alone. Okay, same thing with parangalo, same thing with katangalo. Okay, these are just different forms of the same thing. Same basic idea. Okay, so again, if you can learn a core word like angelo, you can learn all these other ones pretty quickly. Okay, parangelo, which means to command or charge, that's also pretty common as well. That's usually what Jesus does when he commands the devils to go somewhere. He parangelos them. Anangelo, which would mean to report or announce. Katangelo, you see those both. Okay, in other words, you can build your word power actually very, very quickly just by, becoming fluent with compounds. Okay, and keep in mind there's no difference to the verb itself under compound. Okay, the compound really doesn't change the verb at all. Okay, it just basically adds a new sense to it, sort of from the outside, if you will, but it doesn't change how the verb changes under its different principal parts. Okay, so tasso, toxo, etaxa, tetaka, tetagme, etakthane. Okay, these are means to kind of command or to order. Not too common used in the New Testament. That's a little more common in Classical Greek. But hupatasso, which means to subject, which is pretty common. Notice what happens in this case. Okay, you just add the hupo plus the tasso. Okay, and you're good to go. Okay, hupo plus toxo, you're good to go there. But here again, this was originally hupo plus etaxa to get hupetaxa. Okay, then you have tetaka, and you just add the hupo onto it there. Again, you don't begin with the vowel, so there's no reason to elide the hupo. Okay, hupo tetagmai. Okay, but again, finally, this was hupo plus etokthane to get hupetokthane. Okay. All right. Hopefully that's clear. Okay. You're not making any changes to never making any changes to the preposition. In other words, you're never augmenting the upsilon at the beginning there. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and do a couple very common principal parts here, namely erchomai. Okay. This is a very, very common word. It's more common even than porumai is. Okay, its principal parts, are on your list. You will have to memorize them. Okay, erchomai, eleusamai, elthon, elelutha. Okay, the principal parts 5 and 6 are unattested. Okay, but these are tremendously common. Okay, if you can learn those well, you will be able to handle a lot of words that come up in the New Testament, okay, and the Old for that matter. Okay, notice it's partially deponent here. In present and future, we never ever see the verb without this sort of middle ending here. Okay, the mai, sai, tai, methasai, ontai ending. Okay. In the aorist here, we haven't had the second aorist yet, but we'll have that soon enough. This is sort of a special kind of aorist that a small number of usually very common verbs actually exhibit. Okay, and here the perfect just doesn't have a kappa, as you would expect. This is just irregular, has to be memorized. Okay, but other than that, this verb functions just as any other verb does. Okay. You never have this verb in a passive, by the way. Okay, it doesn't make any sense. Okay, let's look at a couple others like this. This is another one that has this kind of special third principal part here. This is the word for cast or to throw, balo. Okay, balo, baloo, ebalon, beblica, beblamai, eblathane. Okay, this is the word for throw or cast. Okay, there's a compound ekbalo, which means to cast out. That's usually the word for doing an exorcism in the New Testament. You see that an awful lot. Notice here the third principal part has that on ending. That's what we'll call a second aorist when we get to that. Okay, don't worry about that now, but just notice that that's just a different variation that we see on the aorist form, the third principal part there. So, all right. So again, don't panic about the verb forms. Okay. Basically, my theory is, as I've said before, I'm trying to load you with a little bit more now so that we can sort of handle in stride later this coming tsunami of verb forms, which is going to start here in a couple weeks. Okay, I think I have my timing right. Okay, so again, it's going to seem like a lot at first. It probably seems like a lot right now. Just keep reciting them and just getting yourself familiar with them. When you go through your vocabulary, I would strongly suggest for verbs making yourself recite the principal parts. Okay, try to get to the point where you can do it by memory. Okay, don't worry about it if it doesn't seem like there's any point to it now. You will soon enough see what the point to it is. Okay, all right, good enough. That's all I have for now. I will see you later.